please, a big round of applause for Juergen.
Hi. All right, a welcome from my side. I'm happy to be here, happy to see so many of you here this early Spanish morning. We're starting it pretty timely after all here, but there's a lot of ground to cover, and it's my pleasure to basically introduce you to this keynote, and at the very end to also do a little bit of an outlook, an outro that connects to the keynote tomorrow. But first things first, we have been busy lately. And you might have noticed that there was a release on release candidates or two in 2016 already from our side. We are very, very busy making our roadmap actually happen. So this is what I'll focus on initially, a little. We're currently in the Spring Framework 4.3 release candidate phase. We have a Spring Boot 1.4 release in milestone 3, if I'm not completely mistaken. So we are actually in a phase where you will get an exciting double pack of a new framework generation and a new boot generation very, very soon for use in production. So let's get right into it. The Spring roadmap. I'm basically doing the right now, you'll get it in June, July part initially, and the more visionary at the very end. But let's start with what we actually have right now. If you look at recent years, you've seen an increased pace of releases. Spring Framework traditionally had a, well, more like major generation every 2 years kind of cycle. We've actually changed our policy, even our planning, quite aggressively. Since Spring Framework 3.2 already appeared 1 year after Spring Framework 3.1, it was already a pretty fast-paced follow-up as the last generation that came in the 3.x line. And it's actually still maintained today. We just released 3.2.17 a couple of, like about 2 weeks ago. So Spring Framework 3.2 is still out there, but we're phasing it out. Let me use the opportunity for a reminder. Spring Framework 3.2 goes end of life at the end of this year. The last Spring Framework 3.2.x release is going to happen towards the end of this year. No further support from our side. Please upgrade. So that was a mandatory statement. But in the same kind of vein, just 1 year later, we went GA with Spring Framework 4.0. And that's, of course, the major generation that we're in right now. It already dates back to December 2013. Maybe that's not where you're putting it in your mental calendar, because the Java 8 support only really went fully production ready in 2014 when JDK 8 actually went GA itself. We were ahead of JDK 8 there. So don't tell anyone, but Spring Framework 4.0 has been, the GA release has been built with a pre-release JDK 8 at the time. It's all good as of 4.0.3. It's all GA now. Right, so, but that was intentional because we've already had plans for follow-up feature releases. The Spring Framework 4.0 release came along with basically 4.1, 4.2, and an optional 4.3 in mind already. Spring Framework 4.0 set the baseline, did a lot of baseline upgrading, JDK 8, the messaging module, WebSockets, that sort of stuff. And we knew that there was stuff to be covered still, some other areas to be covered, some gaps to be completed. So 4.1 followed very quickly. And that's the pace that we keep having. 4.2, and again, came about 9 to 10 months later. It's the typical cycle that we're using right now. And every single one of those 4.x feature releases actually brought a lot of major component model features, major configuration model refinements. You might have suspected that this is kind of co-evolving with Spring Boot, and it actually is. So the 4.1 and 4.2 releases where to some degree also driven by the corresponding Spring Boot releases and the requirements that we get from the developer experience intentions over there in Bootland. So a lot of major refinements coming in every single generation, and we're doing this once more. Oh, yeah, sorry. We're doing it once more, but let's cover one nice little graph that I just had to add. This is the period that we're talking about here, between basically the 3.2, 4.0 core releases and 4.2. These are the download statistics. So this is where we went along with the framework generations that we just talked about. The download releases, the downloads just spiked. This is Maven Central. So I mean, take it with a grain of salt, in particular the absolute numbers. But you know, the relative numbers tell quite a story. Obviously, our feature releases of recent years have been picked up and have been appreciated. We are even checking the download statistics for our versions, and fortunately, the most recent versions are very popular, in particular in Spring Boot, but also in Spring Framework, with a couple of good old, well-established framework versions still being downloaded quite often as well. But yeah, we're going in a nice direction here. And we are continuing from here with the 4.3 generation. Now, last year, I've already been talking about 5.0. Why are we even doing a 4.3? Well, it's kind of connected to the 5.0 roadmap already. So take Spring Framework 4.3 as a kind of on-ramp to 5.0 to some degree. We are completing a lot of stuff in the 4.x generation, which we can easily do there with the system requirements there. But we really have Spring Framework 5.0 in very concrete mind already. I'll connect back to that towards the end of the keynote. So first things first, Spring Framework 4.3. It's coming to you right now. We are not talking about a generation coming sometime 2017. We are talking about something that actually has a GA target date on June 1st. I mean, it's actually quite soon. I hope we can actually make it. But we are in RC2. Now is a great time for your feedback. If you have any intentions, opportunities to actually try the release candidates, please do so. Now's the time, ahead of June 1st, please. All right. So this feature release, again, has a lot of refinements, dependency injection and MVC refinements. If you want to learn more about this, there's a lot of coverage at the conference and on our blogs, not necessarily in a what's new form, more in a you're in this feature area and you get the latest updates there. I'm covering quite a bit of the refinements in my Modern Java Component Design session this afternoon, if I'm not mistaken. The MVC refinements are going to show up in quite a few sessions across the conference. The composed annotation story has been something we've been refining along the way a lot. So it's going to show up in my component design session in particular. But let's pick one further thing here. Spring Framework 4.3 basically is the 3.2 release of the current generation. It's the last major feature release. It's going to get an extended support life, just like 3.2 has right now. 3.2 has this like 4 years open source maintenance window, which is ending at the end of 2016 this year. And we have a similar arrangement for 4.3. It's going to go GA in June. And we don't have any UL date now, but we're going to support it up until 2020. We're going to make more concrete announcements about actual end-of-lifing as we get there, right? The simple idea is you have a framework generation to rely on for the time being. If you have applications on Spring Framework 4.x, please upgrade them to 4.3. And if you don't have any need to upgrade them any further, or if you're on JDK 6 and 7, if you can't make any further upgrades, just stay there. You're going to get a pretty long support window here. And just to drop some numbers your way, this actually works on JDK 6, 7, and 8 still. Keep this in mind. Even on 9 on a kind of pre-release basis. But this is the framework generation with the broadest system requirements that we ever had. Whereas for Spring Framework 5, a little bit of a preview note, we're going to raise it. And this even works on plenty of established turbo generations. If you're still on Tomcat 6 for any reason, it would actually still work there. And it also works on the current Tomcat generations 8.5 and 9.0. By the way, if you're on Tomcat, really do consider Tomcat 8.5. HTTP2 support in the current Tomcat arrangement, approaching production readiness anytime now. 8.5 is your Tomcat release and perfect companion to Spring Framework 4.3. End of the Tomcat pitch. Just to give another indication, another example, in WebSphere land, this translates to you can still run Spring Framework 4.3 based applications on WebSphere 7 and higher. It is actually pretty far back. So if you're in this world, if you have any such needs, in particular any longer term needs until 2020 or so, this is your framework generation. We're doing it for that purpose. All right, so this is for the 3. And so much for my little state-of-the-art in framework land. I'll reappear for a little bit of a 5.0 preview. Let me use the opportunity now to introduce Phil to the stage, who's actually going to tell you a related story from Bootland.
It's a pleasure to be here. I'm really delighted to have been invited. I heard a lot of great things about Spring I/O last year, so this is actually quite a long flight for me, but I'm really pleased to be here. I want to talk to you a little bit about what's new in Spring Boot 1.4. At least, that was the general idea that we had, but I want to kind of take a bit of a diversion. So I'm going to cover some of the new features, but I'm going to do it in a bit of a roundabout way. Let me explain a bit more. This is Onzi, or as we like to call him, Boss. Actually, Onzi is my boss's boss's boss, so he's a 3x boss. And the reason Onzi's on here is because he did this talk at our company conference. It was a really good talk, and I wanted to steal some of his ideas, but more importantly, I wanted to steal some of his slides. So if you're going to steal slides from your boss's boss's boss, best to give them a big credit. So thank you, Onzi. Specifically, this is the slide that I wanted to steal. This is Onzi talking about what he referred to as the circle of code. So the idea of the circle of code is that projects that you work on have this life, and they go through this kind of circle, and we as a company develop tools that help people with this circle of software. So I thought it might be fun to talk about the circle of Spring. But I then sort of think, well, maybe we should refine this a bit. So what about the circle of Spring Boot? So I want to give you some of the history about why the project exists and some of the features that are in there and how they came about. So cast your mind back to 2012. iPhones are a reasonable size. There are no I/O domains. People have to type org, and there is no Spring Boot. But there is Spring Framework, there are Spring projects, and there are Spring conferences, including this one in Washington. And this was actually the first Spring conference that I ever went to. And one of the things that's interesting about when you go to a conference like this isn't just that engineers get to present the ideas they're working on. It's the fact that they can interact with people, and people can tell them about ideas and problems with the product. One discussion at that particular conference led to this bug. So if you go and search for Google, you can find this, look in our Jira, and it's quite a detailed bug with a lot of history. I'll provide an executive summary for you here. Something else interesting was happening in 2012. Various assets from EMC, VMware, where Spring was at the time, the Greenplum database, and a company called Pivotal Labs, which was an agile consultancy company, were coming together to form an as-yet unnamed new company. I don't know if you've ever tried to set up a company. It turns out there's paperwork. a lot of paperwork, which was actually quite good because all the management were tied up doing kind of company stuff. So we, as engineers, were just left alone to get on with it. So we thought, right, let's get to work. Let's fix this problem that people are reporting to us, and let's try to create something new. So, first thing we needed, embedded Tomcat. And it turned out we'd already actually got some prototype code for this. We'd called it Spring Embedded Tomcat. So we took that code and we started to smash it together and started to form a new product. Next thing we needed was support for fat jars or jar in jars. You can do this thing with shade, but we had this idea for a different way of doing it. And again, we'd already had some prototype code. We called it Binks. And the last thing we wanted was this idea of doing production-ready stuff, so metrics. We didn't have anything for this, so we worked on something new, and we called it Spring Actuator. And I still don't know why we called it that. So what are we gonna call this thing? We've got this new product, we've got this new prototype, and the first name we actually came up with was Spring Bootstrap. That was the original name of the project, which was good. But it sounded a bit like a CSS framework. So we renamed it, and we called it Spring Zero, because there's zero config. But that sounds a bit like a soft drink. So we renamed it again, and we went back to Bootstrap. And then someone had the idea, what if we just lock the end off Bootstrap and call it Spring Boot? So Spring Boot was born. Production approved, let's go. Meanwhile, back in the paper land of the new company, someone's had a similar idea. What if we took the name Pivotal Labs, locked the end off it, and called our new company Pivotal? Approved, registered company's house, Pivotal was born. So, we have this new company. What's the first thing we're going to do? Well, we've got to get one of these I/O domains, and we did. We got spring.io. We couldn't get the Twitter handle. Some conference somewhere had already nabbed that, but we got the URL, and we thought, well, what can we do with it? So we've got this website, and this is the old Spring Source website. We could just put that on. It's pretty good, except it's a WordPress site. And it's got some custom PHP that no one will even remember admit to writing. And there's this bulletin board system that keeps getting hacked, so it's just full of spam, and it's a great place if you want to buy Viagra, but not much else. And we're kind of maintaining this thing and keeping it going, but it's yeah, maybe not. So what if we build a new one? Okay. What are we going to use to build this thing? And it turns out we have this application framework called Spring, so we thought maybe we could use that. And we have this new project called Spring Boot, so maybe we can start to develop stuff with that. And who are we going to get to help us build it? Well, we have this agile consultancy called Pivotal Labs that are really, really good at building websites, and more importantly, really good at prioritizing work. So maybe they could help us. And where should we host this thing? Well, it turns out that we have this cloud platform called Cloud Foundry that we're developing, so maybe we could host it on that. And this was probably the first kind of circle. This idea is called dog fooding or eating your own ice cream. And it was, I think, perhaps one of the most beneficial things we ever did in the history of the project, because this feedback loop that we had about needing particular requirements to satisfy a real application, deploying it to the cloud, so making sure that this thing was actually cloud ready, really helped inform the way that Spring Boot actually arrived. And we got it done. One year later, a typical Spring Boot app looked like this: 3 annotations, configuration, enable auto configuration, component scan, version 0.5 was shipped, website went live, job done. So this is Josh. Josh's job is to fly around and meet people. and talk to them about our technology and discuss things with them. And it turns out that a lot of people like our stuff. Some people get really, really angry with free software, and some people give you kind of constructive feedback. And one of the feedbacks that Josh got quite often was too many annotations. We've got these 3 annotations. Every app that we write has to use them. So we had to think, like, too many annotations. What can we do? Let's add another annotation. If there's one thing we know how to do in Spring, it's add annotations. So we did. Spring Boot application was born. So if you're using a modern Spring Boot app, this is probably the annotation you're using. We've done regular releases, 1.2's out, ship it. And we got this feedback, sending Josh to various countries doesn't scale very well. So we actually started to see a lot of feedback coming through in different forms. So we're getting a lot of Stack Overflow, a lot of GitHub issues, a lot of people reporting things on GitHub, which is nice. And something that we perhaps weren't expecting was people of not only telling us things that are wrong with our code, but they've started contributing. And we're getting a lot of GitHub contributions, which we are accepting. Thank you very much. We now have 5,000 forks of Spring Boot. We have over 1,000 pull requests that have been merged, and over 250 people have contributed code that's made it into the main line. So here's just a snapshot of some of the people that have contributed to Spring Boot. So thank you to everyone who's been part of the project. And we kind of expected that this product that we worked on would work well with Pivotal Cloud Foundry. Obviously, it's a kind of related thing. But what we weren't expecting was that there would be so much support from lots of other companies as well. So we've had like Azure, OpenShift, Google, Heroku, so many places now. If you go and look at documentation, or if you go into conferences, you'll find people giving you talks on how to run Spring Boot applications in various different cloud platforms. And this has been really great for us. Another thing we weren't expecting was that people would start to build on our stuff. So Grails, if you're using the latest version of Grails, that builds on Spring Boot. If you've ever used JHipster, which I would recommend that you kind of have a look at, that generates Spring Boot applications. And of course, we have inside Pivotal itself, we have Spring Cloud as well, which is also building on the same kind of infrastructure. And we have commercial offerings around that as well. So this kind of brings us to where we are, or rather, where you are. Like, most people are probably now at version 1.3, everything's live. But the journey for us has continued a little bit. So I want to talk a little bit about what's happened between 1.3 and 1.4. And the first thing that's happened is, it turns out that we weren't the only people that wanted to pay Pivotal Labs to help them develop Spring Boot applications. Quite a few people did. And that started, again, this kind of virtuous cycle, this ice cream, dog food sandwiching that goes on, where we're kind of sending feedbacks back to each other. So we have internal Slack rooms, we get involved with projects, we have face-to-face meetings, but there's email lists. And it's been pretty good. We've been able to explain, this is how you write a Spring Boot application. It's all magic. Everyone loves magic. It's pretty good. Except Pivotal Labs love testing. I mean, they love testing. They really, really love testing. So they want to use Spring Boot application in their unit tests. Well, I mean, you could do it. You have to know about how it's actually these 3 annotations that it's composed of, and you have to understand there's this thing called conditional, and then you have to know about all these different auto configurations that are actually used so you can import them, and you have to get the ordering right, and it works, but it's kind of a little bit, pretty soon your tests start to look a bit like this. And they love mocking. They love Mockito. They love the Mockito annotation. It's easy to use. They can use it in their tests. But they want to use mocking in combination with Spring Boot. And you can do it. I mean, you have to understand there's this thing called the Spring JUnit 4 class runner, and you have to have a run with, and you have to understand that contexts are cached between different things. So if you run the same test twice, the two things have to work out, and you have to remember to reset the mocks between, otherwise the test that runs second won't do it. And you can do it with Dirty's context, and it's there, but it's pretty soon your tests start to look like this. So we have the answer. More annotations. So starting with Spring Boot 1.4, you can, if you're writing a test, you just have one main annotation, Spring Boot test. This replaces about 3 that we had previously. If you're wanting to test a particular part of your application, we have Webb MVC test, JSON test, and data JPA test particular slices. And if you're wanting to run with Mockito, you can now just use @mockbean on a field, and that will create a mock and inject it into your Spring test context. So I think that basically brings me to the end of the little diversion. Almost. There's one more problem that people have been discussing with us. It predates Spring Boot by quite a way. They said, please help us with this problem. You've got to help us. And as a team, we sat down and we thought, well, what's the most helpful software that's ever been written? We have invented Clippy for Spring Boot. And the problem is this. It looks like you've got a massive stack trace. Would you like me to make it readable? And we default to yes. So if you've got a Spring Boot 1.4 application and you get a problem, not every problem, but if you've got a problem that we recognize, like someone's already running my application on this port, and you used to get this kind of splurge like this, what you'll now get is something that looks like this. So a nice, clear, concise message telling you what the problem is and how to fix it. So what's new in Spring Boot 1.4? I think if you really want to know the details, you should go and look at the wiki and read the release notes. But if you really want to feel what it's like to use Spring Boot 1.4, we should have a demo, and I should get Stéphane Nicoll up to show us some code. So thank you very much. Oh. And I'm going to hover here.
You're staying with us, right?
Yeah, I'm not going anywhere.
OK. So I'm supposed to entertain you after that presentation. It's going to be quite difficult for me. Before we start, I should say that the largest keynote presentation ever that I played on my Mac. It's almost 2 Spring Boot apps, I would say, 56 megabytes. Yeah. So we have an app here. I guess the most important things we can do is to showcase a simple app and show you the developer experience that you can get with Spring Boot.
So what are you writing?
So I'm writing an app to give the weather.
Okay.
Barcelona, you know?
So you can just hard code it to sunny.
Yeah, I can do that if I want. So this is an app that's using a third-party services called Open Weather App. It basically has a REST API. You need to register an API key, and then you can ask the weather of any country. If we look at this app, it's being configured like this. So you probably know about that thing, and if you don't, we will explain you. So basically, you have the ability to specify that key to be able to use the service. So let me show you what you get right here. So you get this nice auto-completion if you don't know about that. And you may realize that there is no API key in the system right now. It's not defined. There is no API key, and still the service is working. So how come? Well, it's because I have a system property on my system to specify the key. And I can show you that, and it's being automatically, the value is automatically removed because there is key in the name. So there is a few patterns that we use to avoid displaying sensitive data. OK, so you probably all know about DevTools. So let's start with something. DevTools allows you to work in your IDE, change code, and get updates on the fly without you having to do anything, pretty much anything. And it integrates with live reload, so I'm going to trigger that. Currently, I'm on this default error page because there is nothing for foo, and we're going to
We should add
an error page or something.
Add a, like 404.
Okay,
So,
let's do that.
Who uses DevTools here? Does anyone use it?
Okay. So there is session at the conference that go in more deeper detail about that. So, okay, I have this 4.4 GIF. Might be useful to use, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a 4.4.html. Let's try that. And if I do that, I have an error page.
So yeah, this is new in 1.4. So
is that supposed to do the thing on the bottom?
Yeah, it's fine. It's fine. It's just a projector glitch.
Okay,
Don't worry about it.
Okay.
It's JavaScript. JavaScript always does that. It's fine.
So the first feature that we've added in 1.4 and we want to showcase today is default error page. So previously you had to register a handle to say, okay, if that error occurred, then you should serve that page. And we thought, well, there is a nice naming convention, is just to name the page with the name of the HTTP status code in a certain area, which is error, as you've seen. And if you do that, we will recognize it and we will serve the error page for you automatically, nothing to configure. The other thing that bothers me a lot about this app at this point is it's showing the weather for London. Why? Who did that app, actually?
People in London are obsessed with the weather. It's a good market.
OK, so if we go into our controller, I can see that you outcoded the list of locations, which is probably not what we want. So I want to show you the developer experience of moving that static setting to something configurable and the kind of feature you can get. So first thing is I'm going to ditch that and try to add it to my configuration here.
I spent a lot of time on that code. You know that.
Yeah. It always doesn't work when on stage, you know. So okay, if I write private properly, that's probably going to work better. So I'm creating a simple property, right? And I'm creating accessor for them. That's pretty much the only thing I do. And I'm going to reuse that in my controller. So instead of having the outcoded value, I'm going to inject the properties.
Field injection, right?
Yeah, no, I was wrong because I'm doing 3 talks in this conference and I have like the 3 scenarios in my mind at the same time. So that's next talk. Anyway, so I can see that I can inject this property now just fine, and I'm just going to use it here. Okay, so
that's Spanish for this.
That's Spanish for this. That's Spanish for this.
All right.
Okay, so if I do that, I should probably have the same thing, right? Hopefully. No. Okay.
Oh, yeah, there you go.
Okay, so let's change that. What country could we possibly serve? I have an idea. Let's say that's way better.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Here we go.
You lost London and...
No, I mean, yeah. So this is the experience that you get. And by the way, I wrote location instead of locations. Always a glitch in a demo. But what I meant to show you is you get this nice auto-completion experience right from your IDE. And it does that in STS and in NetBeans as well, if you happen to use that. OK, what can we do now?
I don't know. You got the
You
script.
don't know. OK. So one thing I would like to show you is a new testing feature that Phil just explained. I have a test for this controller. And what that test does, it's mocking the service to avoid, first, having a network dependency, and 2, having you to provide an API key for the service. So it's mocking the service completely. I can show you that here in this test config. So it's a simple mock. And whenever I want to try something, I'm asking the mock to return me some fake data and ensure that the outcome calling the controller is the expected one. So there are a few things that we need to do for that test to work. One, we have to configure it. We have to provide the configuration of the app, and we also have to provide the reference to our configuration, which is this line. Then we have to say we want to have a web app configuration because we want to use mock MVC. Then we have to set up mock MVC because...
Like I said, annotations.
And something which is really important is that, like Phil said, we have to reset the mock at every test, because otherwise, if you have assertions and you don't reset the mock, since the context will be cached for the whole test, then you may get your assertion not working. That's quite a lot of work, right? And that's what you had to do in 1.3. And as you can see, I'm using 1.4 and 3 in this project. You can see that this annotation is deprecated now. So let's try to improve that. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say I want to use a Web MVC test. And I'm going to provide the reference to the controller I want to test. And if I do that, it's only going to create the context with only going to contain that controller. So if you have more controllers in the system, only that one will be created for you. So if I do that, automatically I get mock MVC configured, so I don't need to do this. So I don't need this. That's one step.
That's better, yeah.
That's better.
Yeah.
But instead of playing with the mock myself, I could just do that. And
Wait. Mock
oh,
bean on mock MVC.
sorry, wrong line. Okay,
no.
easy.
No.
Yeah. Mocking the mock?
That looks better, yeah.
Mocking the mock, will it work?
Well, it might work. Probably won't.
So I'm going to remove that thing, not useful anymore. And I don't need to reset the mock, because Spring Boot will do that for me. So let's remove that. And last thing is, you have to remember that class, and it's quite hard to remember. So I thought maybe we could improve this as well. And so now we have a class which is exactly the same, so it's just to be easy on the eye. There is a class now named Spring Runner that does the same thing. And this is the test, so let's see if it still works. Hopefully it does. Hopefully it does.
Does it?
Yeah, it's just a compilation issue. OK. So this is the kind of testing improvement that you have. Another improvement that Juergen will mention in his talk is this is really a traditional service using constructor injection. So you have a couple of dependencies. You need to inject them. Better do that at constructor time. And you have to say, OK, auto-wire those dependencies. If you only have one constructor on your service, this is no longer necessary. So you don't have to provide it, which means if you happen to forget about it, we will manage to still construct the bean.
I was joking about field injection. Constructor injection is definitely the way to go. So
OK.
I thoroughly recommend that.
OK, let's see.
Looks nicer already.
Yeah. So we have this banner, which is probably the most important feature of Spring Boot.
Definitely.
Always said that.
Yeah.
So in 1.3, we thought that maybe we could do something better and have some kind of color banner.
Yeah.
Apparently, according to our community, that was not enough. So someone decided to have the wonderful idea to support PNG images. So let me show you that.
And JPEG and GIF.
Oh, yeah, and JPEG.
Just not animated GIF just yet.
Not yet.
Or GIF or GIF, whatever you want to, I don't know. However you want to pronounce it.
So this is what I have. And I should have right here. OK, just to prove that the slide that Phil showed about the application state of failure is not some kind of vaporware, and it really exists, I'm going to start the application again. And IntelliJ is actually quite smart about it, because it knows it's not supposed to be started twice. So I'm going to override that setting and start a new instance. If I do that, I will get this nice error report. The thing that you need to remember about this is that this is an open API. So if you have things that you want to support, you can, of course, contribute a pull request, but you can also write your own for your own use case if you happen to want a dedicated error message. And we do for a bunch of stuff, like during the conference, with Brian, we happened to screw a configuration class for our talk, and there was a cycle in the bin definition, so one bin asking for another. And we actually got an error message telling us exactly where the problem was, and it was the first time I was trying that feature. And it took me like 20 seconds to figure out what the problem was, compared to, reading the stack trace and everything.
Yeah, please, if you do find that there's like common errors that come up that you know how to fix, please do report them, and we can try and add more of these intelligent analysis.
Okay, so we still have one problem with this app. Let's try to, okay, it's probably back to the default settings. Oh no, Brussels is still here, hopefully. And if we hit the app, every time we do, it's going to call the service and retrieve the weather for us, as you can see in this wonderful log. So we want that to be better, and we want to avoid calling the service if we don't have to. So how can we do that with Spring Boot? It's actually quite easy. So first thing is we need to add a couple of dependencies because we're going to use the caching system. So there is a starter for that, someone said once. So we're adding the cache starter. And for the sake of this demo, we are going to add caffeine.
What's caffeine?
It's the Java 8 rewrite of Guava caches. So this is a new project, and this is something we support as Spring Framework for the 3 and Spring Boot 1.4. What I can do now is I can, as easily as just say, I want caching, right? And I can go on my service, and I can say, OK, these are the methods that actually invoke the third-party service. I'm going to cache that. And I'm going to say, please create a region called weather. And please create a region called forecast. So there is two supported options on this service. One that gives you the weather right now, and one that gives you the forecast for 5 days. So I want also to be smart about eviction, because if I'm using the default configuration, so for instance, if I didn't add caffeine, you would get a default implementation using concurrent hash maps. And that's a problem, because once you get the weather and you don't restart the app, you'll still get the same weather until the application is actually restarted.
My apps crash a lot, so that's not a problem.
OK. Yeah, in my case, when I manage to type properly, it works. So what we're going to do is we're going to use the auto-completion to, let's type caffeine. Then we happen to see that there is a spec there that we can use. And the spec is a factory for how the caches are going to be created. So because I can't remember what it is, I think I have a shortcut somewhere. Yes. So I want only 500 entries in each of these caches, and they should expire after 10 minutes. So if there is an entry after 10 minutes, it's going to be reclaimed, and the call will actually be invoked. And what I want also is I want to record stats. I'll show you in a minute why I do that. OK, so let's start again. So asking plenty of times, and then you can see we only have 2 hits now, which basically works, that proves that the cache is working. The other thing that you get is on metrics, you will get the hit and the miss ratio for the cache. So that's going to be exposed automatically for you. And if there are more statistics that you want to expose, there is also an OpenSPI that you can use to add more data. So I can see now that I have 2 entries in my cache, which are the two cities that we have on the screen. And this is the hit and miss ratio for that cache. You can see that the forecast one is not being displayed because it hasn't been created yet, because nobody invoked that method.
Sweet.
Okay.
Nice. So this is production ready now?
It is. You can use it right now. one more thing that I want to show you is how you can improve the build and environment-related information that you want to display on your app. So you know that there is something you can use right away to use the Git plugin. Use the Git plugin, which will generate metadata about your repository, and it's going to be invoked. So let me show you that before my laptop dies. I need to invoke that plugin. Here we go. So if I do that, and I go to the info endpoint, I have this. You probably use that because it already exists in 1.3, but the thing which is new is you can now control the mode. So you can decide to expose all the data instead of just the simple one. Another use case that was quite frequent is we see a lot of people actually exposing build-related information on that endpoint. Like, what is the group ID and artifact ID of this project? What is the version? And some other build-related metadata. And the way to do it is to actually create keys in your configuration and use filtering. So filtering your configuration, asking the build to filter your configuration. It's a bit nasty because it might filter things you don't want it to do. So we thought that maybe we could improve the situation. And what we did, we built a new goal on the Spring Boot plugin. It also works with Gradle, of course. So let me quickly show you how it works. So I need to add an execution and invoke the goal build info. If I do that, it's also pretty much the same thing as the Git properties. It's going to generate a file that we will recognize, and you'll get those metadata out of the box. If you're not happy about that, and if you want more information, what you could do is, in this configuration here, you can add additional properties. Let's say it's missing description right now, so let's add that. And the nice thing about it is you get full auto-completion for any property of your build. So no need for filtering. So I'm going to use project description here. And it should show up eventually. Here we go. So one thing also you could expose is the version of your artifacts, for instance. OK, what do we have? Oh, yeah, one more demo. And there is actually a full session tomorrow, I think by Andy Wilkinson. I want to show you quickly what Spring REST docs can do. So for that, I'm going to check out this, because I'm not going to code that in front of you. I'm probably going to do plenty of mistakes.
Has everyone heard of Spring REST docs? Everyone seen it? A few people?
Few people, OK. So one thing that the main goal of Spring REST docs is to help you documenting your REST APIs in a way that makes sure that if something breaks, or if your API has changed in a non-backward compatible way, or if it's not tested properly, your build will fail. So you make sure that everything you write in the doc is never outdated, because it's actually based on tests. So I have a new test, this commit added this new test. Let me show you that quickly. Where you can describe the fields of your API, and you can actually, it's actually a test. So it's calling the service, getting a reply back, and using the content of the response to actually generate documentation for you on the fly.
The really nice thing about REST docs is that you can mix the little snippets that it generates with regular ASCII doctor files. So you can actually write real documentation instead of just having a kind of automatically generated API, which means you can really craft really nice, actual real documents for your API.
So this is the kind of API that you get with some kind of curl example, the request and the response. And this is actually the response from your test. So it's not something that you hard-coded at some point and maybe outdated. This is what the test output looks like. And what Spring REST docs is going to do, like Phil just said, is generating those snippets. And you can include those So this is the template of the documentation. And what you do is you include snippets in your documentation where you want them to be, and you'll get that output.
It's really useful.
I think that's it.
Done?
About the demo, yeah.
All right.
And now we need to welcome Juergen again.
Thank you very much.
Big round of applause for those guys, once more. All right, so I hope everybody's keen on upgrading now to not only Spring Framework Photo 3, but also Boot 1.4. By all means, do it. It's what the new kind of baseline will be, as I initially mentioned. Photo 3 and Boot 1.4 will be around for quite a while, supported for quite a while. All will be good in that generation. But there's another one coming. And I've already mentioned that part of our story behind Spring Framework Photo 3 is that it's kind of stuff we can easily do in Photo.X still. We can provide it to you right now, immediately, within the Spring 4 system requirements. Spring Framework 5, though, is about a very different target, really. It's a framework generation that's targeting 2017 entire. Also, the system requirements that will be common in 2017 entire. And roadmap-wise, it is actually somewhat close. We intend to release a Spring Framework 5.0 milestone 1 in July 2016, in time for the Spring 1 Platform Conference in Las Vegas this year. But also merging the efforts that have been ongoing for quite a while already. There's a Spring Reactive project that's going to be merged in. There's some JDK8 baselining going to be merged in. So it's really a first milestone of the next major generation of the framework. And we already have an RC target. Obviously, any targets given in any software-related presentation are always a little bit vague and subject to change. But we intend to have an RC1 this year still, basically as a Christmas present. The most important effort initially is a baseline upgrade, right? As basically the broadest, most affecting effort across the code base is a baseline upgrade. We are literally going to touch the entire code base and going to raise it to JDK 8+. You might have noticed there's no generation of the framework that was JDK 7+, because Spring Framework Photo.X and Photo 3 still is JDK 6, 7 and 8, JDK 6 baselined. We basically skip JDK 7 because the baseline upgrade doesn't really benefit us or you, whereas the JDK 8 baseline upgrade is really, really worth it. So Spring Framework Photo 3 stays on JDK 6+, does everything it can do to you. It's mainly used with JDK 7 and 8. We know that, we focus on that. But as of Spring Framework 5, it's JDK 8+. We're also going to raise to Servlet 3.0+. That's not really aggressive. So if you look at the remainder of the baseline upgrades, they're not super aggressive. Servlet 3.0 dates back to 2009. It's a compromise between the technical benefits of the upgrade versus support for common established runtime platforms out there. Servlet 3.0+ seems to be easily doable, so that's what we focus on. Whereas for others, JPA 2.1, Bean Validation 1.1 not mentioned here, those date back to 2013, but are really worth upgrading to. They provide benefits to us in our JPA and Bean Validation integration code. They will provide benefits to you as well. At the same time, it's a baseline upgrade. So we remove some auto-adapting code in the frameworks. Well, I admit some of those things are more beneficial to us initially than to you. Because if you use those versions of, say, JPA, or if you run on JDK 8, if you run on a modern servlet container, if you use Spring Framework Photo 3, Spring does everything it can do for you, right? It auto-adapts to those most recent API versions and does everything to run in the most optimal fashion possible. So basically, you get all the benefits already, but we have to support this adaptation code. Are we on server 3.1? Are we on JPA 2.1? Then this, otherwise this. So admittedly, very important for us, in particular as a preparation for the next generation of the JDK, and also to some degree, if they're coming, the next versions of, say, JPA or the servlet spec. We really hope that servlet 4.0 will be coming our way, but that's, I might refer to that back in just a bit. Spring 5 and JDK 9 is an important theme in its own right. JDK 9 has been, well, making progress for a long time already. They published snapshots, they published builds. We've been trying since JDK 9 build 95 something. They are now at 118. There's quite a bit of progress made already. And our mission for Spring 5, for Spring Framework 5.0 already, is to be the best possible citizen in a JDK 9 world. So we are JDK 8 baselined. We expect mainstream Spring 5 usage to be on JDK 8. At the same time, if you're using Spring 5 on JDK 9, the framework does everything it can do to provide the best possible experience to you. Of course, that's about compatibility with JDK 9, few corners that we have to touch there, for sure. But it's also about embracing JDK 9 to the best possible degree. The schedule is intentionally close. So remember, Spring Framework 5.0, RC1 as a Christmas present this year. We have a GA target, the general availability target, towards the first quarter, March next year, roughly. Intentionally, because JDK 9 also targets March next year for GA. So ideally, those would go together. But at this point, I cannot talk about the alignment here without mentioning that I expect JDK 9 to either be cut in its feature set or to be delayed. So take it with a grain of salt. JDK 9 might not go GA in March 2017. Our plans for Spring 5 remain. If the alignment doesn't work out, we intend to release Spring Framework 5.0 just so, with preview JDK 9 support to the degree possible at the time of the release. So we're not waiting for JDK 9. Now, a sketch of what might be possible in JDK 9 with the Jigsaw module system. Not going into too much detail because this is a sketch. It does not actually work properly right now because Jigsaw is somewhat limited in what it can do. We have been in touch with the Jigsaw team. We voiced our requirements and concerns. There's a nicely compiled list for what we need in order to provide this module experience. In Jigsaw, we need, for example, a way to express optional dependencies within our module declarations and our module exports. At this very point, as I stand here, that's not actually possible on Jigsaw. It's high up in the waiting list, highly prioritized. Several community stakeholders expressed the same requirements as we did. Unfortunately, Jigsaw still cannot do it. It's a little unclear whether in JDK 9 it will actually be able to do it. But that's kind of what we're tracking. We have a vision of how we would like Spring 5 to work with the Jigsaw module system in JDK 9. If we can make it happen, we are going to make it happen. If JDK 9's Jigsaw turns out to be too limited, well, so be it, right? There's always the class path mode. So if you upgrade to JDK 9 and run Spring Framework 4.3 or 5 on it, you can still, by default, just run it in class path mode, like you do with JDK 8, not explicitly using Jigsaw. So there's no showstopper. We expect plenty of Spring applications to be upgraded to JDK 9, even without this module arrangement. Completely ignoring Jigsaw, basically, just upgrading to JDK 9 for other purposes. The HTTP2 stack, the ALPN stack included there, or the compact strings feature, the garbage collection upgrades. More operational characteristics than anything else, really. So, but, you know, if there's a chance to make this happen, we will. So talking about HTTP2 and the operational stuff is not just about JDK 9, but actually has a connection, because JDK 9 includes ALPN and an HTTP2 capable new client API, stuff that's really important to happen for HTTP2 to become mainstream in Java land. There's also Servlet 4.0. So basically, HTTP2 in Java has plenty of efforts going on right now. Some in JDK 9, the basic protocol support and the client APIs. Some in Servlet 4.0, where it's mostly about standardizing, meaning enforcing HTTP2 support in servlet containers. Servlet 3.1 didn't actually do anything about HTTP2 yet. So it's about some general compatibility arrangements in the servlet spec, clarifications of what needs to happen when you run with HTTP2, and a few API features, which I do not expect to be of mainstream relevance, really. It's more for framework integrators than for applications. Servlet 4.0, I should mention, is not actually here right now, right? They started the effort a while ago. Servlet 3.1 dates back to 2013. It's really about time for Servlet 4.0 to happen, but it's not really making progress. In particular, in the past half year, it's kind of stalled along with other Java EE8 specifications. We are involved. We have Tomcat committers on the team, key Tomcat committers like Mark Thomas on the team. We are involved in Servlet 4.0. We are trying to make it happen towards Tomcat 9. We are in touch with the JD guys in that respect as well, but it's a specification controlled by the JCP and Oracle ultimately. It's not in our hands when it will be released. Currently, the expectation is mid-2017. No idea whether that's actually going to happen. So in the meantime, we're going to focus on a very pragmatic arrangement. HTTP2 support on the current generation of servlet containers. For example, taking Tomcat 8.5 as previously mentioned, or a 9 milestone. Taking Jetty 9.3, which was actually first leading HTTP2 support in the current generation of servlet containers, or Undertow 1.3. So the current generations of Tomcat, Jetty, and Undertow are perfectly HTTP2 capable. By all means, use them. We need to embrace HTTP2. If we just wait for things to happen in Java land the usual way, we're going to be way too late for the general industry. The browsers did their job. Firefox, Chrome, and even Internet Explorer /Edge, right? Everybody did their job, except the Java server side to some degree. We really need to get our act together here. We need to embrace the efforts that are going on. Tomcat 8.5, Jetty 9.3. Use those things, upgrade to those generations of the service, enable HTTP2, make sure that you actually have an HTTP2 story in your systems. All right, a last note as a kind of cliffhanger. Obviously, a key theme in Spring 5, since it's been mentioned several times, is reactive programming. And our Spring reactive effort is going to be merged into 5.0 and 1 already. So you're going to be able to play with our reactive programming model vision very soon now, in July already. This is a sketch, so details might still change, and it's kind of making assumptions about some custom repositories. Ignore that. It's about the style. What we're going to focus on, what we'd like to make happen, is a programming model with web endpoints looking like Spring MVC, stylistically, but running on a reactive kernel underneath, running on Netty, running on a reactive adaptation of, for example, Jetty underneath, and providing a programming model where you do not make assumptions about just getting a request, processing it within a single thread, calling a repository, blocking, waiting, and writing the response, but where you rather declare incoming types like the flux type here, outgoing types like the monotype here, that allow you to express your processing arrangement in a way where the underlying runtime can efficiently call you back when data comes in, when data is ready to be processed, when output is ready to be written, when the output streams allow you to actually write output. Underneath those covers, you'll have a back pressure-driven reactive engine there's no servlet container or standard servlet assumptions underneath. You may use a servlet container which also has reactive streams capabilities, but you don't have to. The more native version of it is, for example, running on netty. And using our reactor project as kind of the underlying kernel, the underlying engine. Also the underlying API provider, Mono and Flux here, actually are reactor types. If you're interested in this space, by all means, make sure that you're appearing here at the venue early enough tomorrow, because tomorrow's keynote is about our reactive programming model vision, our thinking behind all of this. So this is just a little bit of a teaser for what things may look like stylistically, what we're focusing on as a kind of goal for the reactive web endpoint model. There's much more to it. It's not just about web endpoints for a start, and there's a lot happening underneath the covers. If you're basically designing applications, architectures for 2017 and onwards, make sure that you're considering those kind of efficiency concerns, making the best possible use of your available system resources, and reactive programming just as a key element in that thinking. All right, well, so let's summarize where we started and where we ended. You're going to get Spring Framework 4.3 basically right now in June. You're going to get Spring Boot 1.4 soon. Summer. There's no fixed target date yet, I guess, but an RC is going to come pretty soon now, I would think. July-ish? Anyway. So Spring Framework 4.3, Boot 1.4, coming your way for your production environments very soon now, with plenty of worthwhile refinements. Spring Framework 5.0 happening early 2017 without a fixed GA target. RC1 as a Christmas present this year. Milestone 1, at least planned as a Christmas present. Milestone 1, 5.0 Milestone 1 planned for July. So it's not production ready at that point, obviously, but it'll be ready for you to try it, to provide feedback to us, to get some of the experience from it, in particular from the reactive programming model arrangements and from the JDK 8 baseline upgrades. All right, so that's our story. There's going to be a Boot 2.0 coming with Spring Framework 5.0, but I'm not making any promises about that quite yet, but it will happen. Obviously, there's going to be a new boot generation. So expect a Boot 2.0 to come and follow Spring Framework 5.0 next year, but that's a little bit too far ahead for any concrete planning yet. All right, so much for this story. Thanks for your attention. Enjoy the conference, enjoy your coffee break initially. There are plenty of sessions here where some of those topics are being followed up on. So if you're interested in any particular parts, just go to the sessions. We're happy to have conversations after the sessions with you one-on-one as well. Thanks.